Rick and Morty comic issue 12, Headspace. Oh, I remember reading this one, and I put off reviewing it because it was so confusing. As a side note, I hate that when you open up book 2 of the hardcover comic issue collecting volumes for this comic, the first page constantly makes some noise until you hold it down with another page. It made me wonder where the noise was coming from and assume it was my laptop malfunctioning. We start out with Jerry being told to leave something alone in his house, as Rick was probably smart enough to have it booby-trapped or even hooked up to a hell dimension. I love how genre-savvy the main characters are in this series. It makes perfect sense after all their experience with Rick. Jerry's stubborn because this is still his house, and Rick can't have control over everything. And it turns out he's talking about what's supposed to be his toaster, as he says, "And I like it darker." Summer says that Rick had modified it to make perfect toast. And Jerry's snarky, saying, "Perfect to who, Hitler?" It does make sense that Jerry would be mad and defensive about a guest in his house kinda taking control of it without his permission. While it was surprisingly sweet of Beth to kiss him on the cheek, but he somehow doesn't look like he appreciates the rare gesture from her, probably because she's calling him a monkey. She tells him that the toaster could blow him to space if he's not careful. She says that if he asks Rick for help, she'll get him extra bananas with breakfast. Who has bananas with their breakfast? It's lazy that we aren't told what their breakfast is. Jerry tries to keep himself calm as he nervously goes into Rick's lab with a plan to fix the toaster. He asks Rick if he could borrow something, and is shocked at what he sees. He's naturally terrified going back into the kitchen, with there still being a bit of a light-hearted tone, as Beth is totally oblivious and thinks Jerry got the help he wanted. Jerry tells her that Rick is dead, mentioning his head, and Beth goes into denial and thinks he's joking as a result. Jerry says that he went for a screwdriver and it was on the table with wires connected to it. And then Summer asks where Morty is. It turns out Morty's not at school, even for something extracurricular. Shows how oblivious Beth is about her own son that she doesn't know whether he's got any extracurricular activities or not. Jerry has a good point, snarking, like Rick would let him join the soccer team. It's good writing to have even the team idiot have some area where he's smart and right all the time, because usually he's the one character I've never been able to accept and get used to because he's too stupid. Jerry lampshades how thanks to Rick, Morty could be anywhere, and says amusingly, "Try any of a million places your father could have left him. You got any numbers for those? I'll start dialing." Beth says he wouldn't do that to Morty, and Jerry says that Rick would have probably used him as a human shield or sold him for parts in exchange for some kind of psychedelic space beans. And look at that, I'm smiling again. I can even hear Jerry's voice from the show in my head when reading those lines. Jerry says that the family is nothing to Rick but minor inconveniences he has to navigate every morning in exchange for pancakes and their son, who he treats like a lab animal. Jerry then gets interrupted by a loud booming sound. Beth suddenly thinks to call out Summer's name when that booming could be from anything, and it turns out Summer's holding some tool that's sending out a portal, and she's going to go into the portal with a convenient tool to try to find them. But that's stupid because there's an infinite amount of universes. They could be anywhere. They clearly know where Rick is, so why would they assume Morty was in another dimension? He wouldn't come home without him. It'd take her forever to find Morty, and even then, how would she know that he was her Morty? She's really desperate to think this is a good idea. She's just doing it because it's her only option. Beth can't keep her from pressing the button. Well, at least Summer says that she just needs to zero in on his wave harmonies with some tech. So she has a Rick detector? Again, how does it tell him apart from all the other Ricks based on his brainwaves alone? Well, I guess since Ricks know about other Ricks, they put some microchip in themselves with a unique ID for each Rick. And they used the Council of Ricks to make sure they didn't randomly come up with an ID that was taken. That doesn't explain her being able to detect Morty's, though. Then the portal turns red and makes noise as Summer gets pushed down out of the way, and Beth says that this means there's no one there. Jerry says, "That's right," unhappily, as he always expected this. And Beth snaps at him, "That's right? You what? He's gone, so now you win?" Jerry says, "No, I..." And Beth cleverly imitates him. "And such a little man I'm gonna pick now to claim my petty little victory?" And I'm still smiling. This series is great at staying amusing, even in the face of needlessly dark stuff happening. And I love that Jerry gets Beth to realize that she's the one who turned a blind eye to Rick and let him take Morty wherever he wants. At least Beth calls out Jerry on being just as complacent. And again, she's interrupting and imitating him, and I love it. She starts crying, and I can't help but wonder if this is how realistically every universe's version of Rick's family reacts in a universe where their own Morty gets killed and not replaced. The series is self-aware. It doesn't not realize how dangerous Rick is. She somehow blames Jerry for this because he's too wrapped up in competing with Rick to be a good father. How? Fortunately, Summer lampshades them blame each other for stuff they can't control. And she inexplicably says a long, profound speech that turns nihilistic like Rick in the end, saying that the universe is meaningless, stuff happens, and people die. Morty had to tell her that in the show. It makes sense that Rick would influence her, and she's a different Summer. Surprisingly, the parents apologize to each other and hug. Jerry even says he loves her, though she just says, "I know." It seems out of character at this point for them to be affectionate and acting like an actual couple. But it makes sense because if they never did that, they'd be divorced. They just don't usually do that because I guess the series thought them being in a bad marriage was funny. Summer's parents comfort her, and Beth helps her stand up and hugs her, and they walk away from two filled-in pits in the ground, which is confusing because this isn't the show's universe. This is the comics universe, where Rick and Morty didn't have to go to another universe and replace versions of themselves that just died and bury them. What did she bury? There's no Morty to bury. It's good for a dark series to have a scene like this to reaffirm how much the family does love each other. Even if it was in the end a pointlessly dragged out, fake out death realization scene. I mean, at least Sonic tends to keep those short. Anyways, we finally see Rick and Morty. And they're in danger, with Rick shooting with a ray gun and telling Morty while belching to keep running. He says he doesn't know which kind of alien invaders these are either. He wonders what their armada is doing parked outside Earth's orbit, and this other Rick isn't leaving them much to work with. Morty's confused about him mentioning another Rick in invasion. What is it with Rick waiting until the last possible moment to tell his companions vital information? He's like Fleetway Sonic. And it's obviously just making things harder on him because he has to focus on both telling him stuff and focusing on the danger and doing things right. It's amusing how he sighs all reluctantly before explaining to him that he found the head of another Rick floating in an empty dimension for no apparent reason and took it back to his lab, where they entered the memory centers of its dying consciousness to find out what happened to wipe out his universe, which is just like theirs, only with a slightly accelerated timeline. And I'm trying not to smile at how complicated this is and how the whole joke is that they're self-aware of it. You'd think Morty wouldn't need to be told this though. You'd think he'd remember that they went to the head's memory centers. And why would the head be spared but not its universe? Rick shoots an alien again and jumps down carrying Morty as he complains about Morty not laughing at his joke. It's more realistic that he doesn't laugh in a dangerous situation, which is good writing instead of the tone being confused like modern Sonic. Rick says that he thinks these aliens have something to do with wiping out that universe. Just because they were there at the time? Why would they do that on purpose when that inconvenienced them too? It must have been by accident. How do you accidentally wipe out a universe? Also, I seriously have to question the priorities of the comic censors. They censor out swearing of all kinds, but everything else that's dark is allowed. Gore is allowed, but not swearing. It's just as stupid in the show when you're not watching the DVDs. He doesn't know what brought the aliens here, and tells Morty to watch his step. Morty says this is an elevator and they'll be trapped. Rick says he thought of that, and tells him while moving a panel from the wall to sit tight in the Morty corner. Again, why does Morty not know how they got here? This is an awkward way to exposit to the audience, but at least it was amusing. The elevator starts moving weirdly, somehow, and Rick says that because he's got a big brain with powerful neural pathways, only he can navigate the strong current. It's amusing how even in a situation like this, he gets all caught up in bragging about himself, and he's still serious, rather than unlikable. He says he's gotta concentrate. The elevator smacks into an alien with explosions behind it, as I wonder how he's making the elevator move that way, when I thought they were just reliving the memory of a Rick. And they get out of the elevator. Rick tells Morty that the memory they're in just provides the path, and they can still die here. He tells them to do what he does, and does a fancy jump in midair, shooting both aliens at once while upside down. He has a lot of faith in Morty. He tells a horrified Morty that they've got 45 seconds left. Morty says they're surrounding the ship and look angry. Rick says it'll be more like 32 by the time he gets that door closed. He says that military armadas like this one link their ships together in the same navigational networks and are usually piloted remotely, which means that most of them wouldn't know one system from another, or how much system access a genius could find in a single elevator control panel. He says they're about to be the least of the aliens' problems, as I'm still confused, and there's an explosion and it looks like the elevator's in space. He says a bunch of technobabble trying to explain this. He set up a slow build meltdown that the computers would read as engine exhaust at first and then explode. He then says that he likes this Rick style. So he was doing what he thought the other Rick did? But he only got to this point by using his mind to control the elevator. So other Rick couldn't have possibly gotten to this point. Rick says that of course the aliens are coming back because otherwise they wouldn't be inside the other Rick's memory. He wishes Morty had more ideas. Morty lampshades that he was dragged around without being told anything. And then he wonders if this is all something the other Rick did. They get interrupted and look weird in one panel, and then Morty asks if that was them and if they're back. Rick says that wasn't them because there's no way they could scramble more warships this fast. Then he panics and asks Jerry what he did to Rick's head. This is a great balance of high tension and silliness at the same time. Rick says that the power supply must have cut out even though he thinks that should be impossible, and it should have kept the Rick's head in suspended animation for centuries, unless someone did something really stupid. Rick's the stupid one for not leaving the family a note explaining everything to them. He didn't even lock his lab's door? He really has bad social skills if he didn't anticipate this. The whole arc is set off by an idiot bull. It's not like his lab is in another universe where his family can't access. We see the family holding a funeral for the two of them, at extremely short notice, where Jessica was nice enough to show up, and we see Squanchy, Bird Person, and even the combination clone of Hitler and Adolf Lincoln from the show, who died in his debut episode. All they're perfectly fine because this isn't the show's universe. Seriously, a funeral doesn't happen that fast. It's like literally the same day. So as they continue to look weird, Rick guesses what's going on, thinking that Jerry wanted something new to scratch himself with, and says that if he's lucky, the radiation burnt Jerry's hands off so he won't have to feed them to him when they get back for touching his stuff. But that's funnier than it should be. I kinda giggled. Morty asks why he can't beam them out the way he beamed them in. Rick says that his portal gun here is just a memory construct without the power. All the energy for their extraction was being generated by the power supply Jerry severed. And this reality is only running on the last few sparking synapses of other Rick's brain. How would they still be sparking? At least they tried to explain it, because otherwise, I'd have to wonder how they didn't completely lose energy the second the head was unplugged. You'd think they'd have immediately been screwed over. Rick says he didn't want to do this, creates a portal and hopes it's still there, and then we see Morty's house, in a container of some kind in the lab, and learn that the same thing is going on with the head of another version of Morty in another unappealing page. So this overwhelming and confusing issue was about Rick and Morty going into the memory center of the head of another Rick, whose dimension was accidentally wiped out, except for his head apparently, because I guess only that got the chance to go through a portal. And they're able to do this because the head was plugged into a great energy source, until Jerry unplugged it because he naturally mistook it for his own Rick, and the family thought they lost their own Rick and Morty. All because Rick didn't just tell them what was going on. Why did Rick find that head floating in another dimension? What, did he look away from his portal gun and create a portal to the wrong dimension by accident? I guess so. Otherwise the whole plot wouldn't have happened. It was also very lucky for them that they didn't immediately get killed when the power supply was unplugged, as somehow there were still synapses remaining. At least the story was amusing. It was needlessly dark with the heads thing. I wish they censored the showing of that instead of the swears, but they did a good enough job distracting you from the darkness with natural comedy. But the mere image of those heads is still enough to taint my memory of the story arc most of the time.